But you know, it's not just the Albanese government's race revolution that's in strife. How about its green energy revolution? Its vast plan to supposedly help stop global warming, this catastrophe, by replacing our remaining coal-fired power stations with wind farms and solar farms and batteries, and do it all so very fast that in just 7 years' time, 82% of our electricity is going to come from renewables. It's a wonderful dream, except of course, absolutely nothing is going to plan. That plan being to install 20,000 solar panels a day until 2030, plus build 40 big wind turbines a month, plus 10,000 kilometres of big transmission lines to join it all up. But everywhere you look, there's trouble. There's massive cost blowouts. There's delays. Yesterday, for instance, Energy Minister Chris Bowen admitted very little of that 10,000 kilometres of lines had been built, with much of it now bogged down by objections from people that don't want these monsters all over their land.
How much of that 10,000 kilometres has actually been built?
And there are a couple of projects under the previous government. Yes, the funding deals that we've done with the states have not yet led to the new projects having been commenced. But of course, we've done the funding deal. The money is now there, and now the companies are getting on with ordering the kit, dealing with the landholders.
Now that anger at all those wires and those wind farms has spread to Labor heartland, the Hunter Valley, which is coal territory. Now the government thought, all right, you know, objections of this stuff on land, we'll put more of these wind farms out at sea, not land, even though that's much more expensive. And that included out in the sea off the coast. You could see it from the Hunter Valley region, still from the coast if you stood there, if it gets built. And the people there have hit the roof. It's got so bad that Minister Chris Bowen arranged to have private talks today with selected community leaders in Port Stephens to smooth things over. Joining me is someone who's helped lead the opposition to these wind farms, Troy Radford, president of the Newcastle and Port Stephens Game Fish Club. He's actually hosting a public rally against these wind farms next month. Good to see you. Let me start with this meeting today with Chris Bowen. I don't know whether you were invited to it. I know you're on holidays now, but what message would you want the Energy Minister to have got from that?
Mate, yeah, so I'm on holidays, unfortunately, at the moment, and we missed out having the meeting with Bowen today. He invited 10 people from the community. We're lucky enough that we got to send a couple of representatives from our club. The big thing is the consultation period was inadequate. 65 days was the consultation period. It was underhanded. No one in the community knew about it. There was only 2,000 submissions received for the whole of the Hunter Valley, which included Great Lakes, Port Stephens, Newcastle and the Central Coast. Out of those 2,000 submissions, there was 66% were against this project. So we're actually asking Mr. Bowen to go back to the table and put out the submission again and let people actually know what he's prepared to do or planning to do to this environment. And today he actually declined and said no, he will not be going back to a consultation period.
Well, Troy Radford, that's because he's running way behind in his plans. He's really up against it. I think it's going to fall apart, but he's got to keep pushing. You're going to get these by hook or by crook if he can help it. What is your problem with these offshore wind farms?
Well, there's quite a lot of problems. Originally, when we first found out about them, we were worried about losing our fishing grounds. Now, we've got world-renowned marlin grounds out of Port Stephens. We hold the biggest tournament in Australia. It generated, back in 2011 when they did a survey, $19 million in a 3-week period. So it's huge for our community. As we looked into it more, we actually found how bad it is for the environment. The animals, the whales, the birds, the devastation that this is going to leave on the environment is unbelievable. We're also extremely worried about the sheer size of it. It's 18,000 square kilometres. It's 95 to 100 kilometres long, this zone, 15 kilometres wide. These turbines are floating. There's not too many places in the world that they've able to successfully build floating turbines. Now, we've been in plenty of meetings with companies about this. Now, one of the companies has informed us that the structure under the water to make these turbines float have the same displacement as a coal ship. Now, we're going to potentially have 300 or 400 of these turbines in the coast, which will potentially change the current, the Eastern Australian current that comes down the coast every year, natural cooling process that cools the oceans. Now, if this gets changed,
look,
it could
I don't know.
the ocean and change the environment.
Those are real problems. For me, it's the visual ugliness of all this, but whatever. Rhys Westbury is joining us. He runs the Stop Wind Farm off Port Stephens Facebook page. He wants to expand this even further. Rhys, thanks for your time. How much community opposition do you think there is to these things?
Hi, Andrew. Thank you for having me on your show as well. And hey, Troy. Troy and I have been in conversation quite a lot as both team players in gearing up our communities, respective communities, it's the same. We want to generate a lot more awareness around this issue to tackle together. I started the Facebook page going on 5 weeks ago or so. And I'd first just been made aware that this was all going ahead from my mum. She's a sales rep and she travels down to the Central Coast for work. And I'm an actor, and I actually have quite a bit of time on my hands right now being between acting gigs. So I came home for a visit and I was going to start working back up here. And Mum goes, "Hey, did you know that there's a wind farm that they've just declared here in Port Stephens?" And I said, "No. Who told you about that?" And she said, "I just heard it on the Central Coast radio, that the declared wind zone." Well, yeah, and it's not a proposal. They've declared it. The declared wind zone is from Port Stephens to Norah Head. But the Norah Head side has been pushed back, significantly pushed back, and now it's been somehow pushed out to 20 kilometres from its initial 10. But so she said, we weren't even aware of the 10. And I said, "You're kidding? Like, how did that go on and ahead without anybody knowing
Rhys,
about
it's incredible, isn't it? That this is just an example how they just try to run roughshod over the community. They're in such a haste that this is how you pick it up. I mean, I don't get it. Now, Troy, I don't know whether you guys, look, I'm sure Rhys, being an actor and all that, maybe wasn't as conservative as me. I was saying nuclear power stations instead. Has this changed your mind on nuclear power, that maybe we should have it because at least it'd be in one spot, not covering the whole horizon, from north to south with wind farms?
Yeah, well, definitely. Originally, 6 months ago, I would have said that I would have been against nuclear power. But now, the more research we do, I think it's an avenue that needs more investigation and something that needs to be looked at, because the idea of wind power being called green energy is false. It's definitely not green. It's nowhere near it. So we do need to look for other avenues, and nuclear power should be investigated. They keep saying that the wind power is cheap energy. It's actually not. In a meeting last week with a company that's proposed to do them, actually admitted that wind power at the moment is the dearest form of power, offshore wind. So we need to look at every avenue.
Offshore wind is very expensive. Rhys Westbury, have you changed your mind on nuclear power now that you see what green power looks like?
Now, listen, Andrew, honestly, I entered into this race against time, essentially now. It was a hustle bustle initiative to simply start door knocking around my neighbourhood here in Boat Harbour. It's a glorious spot. I've been very privileged and lucky to grow up here. And as I said, I've been leaving, coming and going out of town quite a lot for work. But in coming back, I just caught up with all my old neighbours and just door knocked and just checked in with them and said, "Hey, have you heard about this? Have you heard about this going ahead?" And the unanimous response was no. they weren't aware. And rather than inserting my bias, because yes, in fact, Andrew, I think it's a ruse. Essentially, I think that, wind farms, whilst they mean well, and they can generate a certain facet of power. I'm no scientist,
Yeah.
but I believe they should be onshore. If they're going to go anywhere, I don't see the purpose of having them out in our ocean.
Yeah, but then you get also people complaining, Reece, that, and we've seen it already. I've had people up from Columban and Caban, for instance, in Queensland, saying they're just hideous. They're on a mountain overlooking them and they just hate them too. So we shall see. Troy Radford, Reece Westbury, thank you both so much for your time. Good luck in your campaigning.